Hello, World Singers. My name is Brooke.
And I'm Tyler.
And this is
Cosmere Conversations. Hello, all of you lovely world singers. We are so excited once again to be diving deep into the Stormlight Archive. We have an informationally dense episode ahead, so I hope that you have put on your study caps and have a couple of notebooks, minimum 2.
Yes. Yeah, this is going to be a great reference for you before we get into Stormlight Archive 5, just to remember all of the things that there are to know about the Heralds, kind of where we're at, the basics of what we know so far, because I am pretty sure we're going to get a good amount of info in addition to this in the next book. So this is your quick reference if you are the kind of person that also likes written notes. I have created what I must say is a pretty nice outline style note document for this episode. If you are a patron, you can get it on our Patreon. If you're not a patron yet, maybe you want to join.
To get those super sweet notes, but anybody, regardless of your patron status or not, has the capability to rate us on the little app that you are listening. Go to the iTunes, leave us a comment. Our podcast is not that big. I read everything. Every comment that is left anywhere, I read it. So if you want my eyeballs onto your super sweet comments, leave them, and that would be great.
Or if you just want to help other Cosmere fans find a great Cosmere podcast, then rating and reviewing will help that happen.
Be the change that you want to see in the Cosmere world.
Yes.
So as we said, this is going to be a pretty reference-focused episode, allowing you to refer back to this instead of doing all of the references that we did into the text. So we're trying to make things a little bit easier for your future searches and your future questions when it comes to who are the Heralds? What are the Heralds? What are they doing?
Let's start by talking about kind of the history or the background of the Heralds.
Yeah, kind of a basic timeline to set us in time and space and give us some context.
Yes. The Heralds were born on Ashen, and they made their way to Roshar in the initial wave of immigrants after Ashen was destroyed. The only kind of asterisk to this is that there's the potential that Shalash was born on Roshar because she is the daughter of Yezrian. And the words of Brennan that I saw, he said, yes, they were all born on Ashen, except maybe Shalash, and he couldn't remember. So that's the information that we have.
The Heralds are going to be instrumental in the first Desolation, and this is the Desolation of mankind. The invasion of Roshar by the humans is jump-started by them fleeing Ashen because of some type of problem with what is labeled surge binding, but shouldn't be thought of in the same way when we're talking about modern surge binding of Shallan or Kaladin.
Yes, surge binding can be used as a generic term for power wielding. Any type of investiture usage could be called surge binding. As far as we know, there were not Nahel bonds on Ashen, so it would have been a different thing from what we see the Knights Radiant doing. The Heralds and that first wave of humanity came to Roshar. Initially, things were chill. The singers were like, hey, you can have this little green pocket of Roshar since y'all are soft little things without carapace and you might die in the high storm. So like go be in the soft land, now called Shinovar. And then eventually, as humans tend to do, they were like, this isn't enough. Give us the whole planet. And thus the wars began.
We also know that with that transition from Ashen to Roshar, the humans also seemingly brought along their god, their shard in the system, Odium. And Odium begins to play more a role at the same time. Was it always his plan to move the humans over to set up a clash with the shards existing there? Was it the humans and then Odium kind of backdoored his way into like supporting or kind of using what the humans were already getting after? We don't have those answers yet.
Right. And I'm curious, there's a big question here about what happened if Odium was originally kind of the god of the humans. What happened to make him switch sides and align with the singers, eventually creating the fused by giving them these special powers so that they could remain after death as cognitive shadows and enter a new host, becoming born again and born again and born again. That eventually leads the Heralds to create the Oathpact as an answer to that. So there's sort of this like nuclear armament type thing, race for power. Odium powers up the singers, and then the humans have to power up by getting the Heralds. And my question, I don't think this will be solved in Stormlight Archive 5, but maybe in the second half of the series. What happened in that space to make Odium switch sides?
It's an excellent question, and this is where the episode is going to define itself as primarily informational and not speculative.
Yes.
We are not going to go down that rabbit hole.
No.
We are going to hold back a little bit.
But we're going to lay out the questions so that we can kind of notate them and keep our eyes out in all of our rereads and our upcoming reads of Stormlight 5 for the answers.
So you've set us up. There's been this seeming reversal by Odium to align with the singers, and then the founding of the Oathpact, an agreement that is said to be done by Ishar, the original bondsmith. And the Oathpact is 5 men and 5 women who make a pact with honor to seal the fuse on Braze. Most of these men and women are either kings, general, famous scholars, or otherwise notable people in the society before they are elevated. And the one exception is Taln, who is said to be something of a everyman soldier, maybe like an everyman bodyguard, but not an elevated person in the hierarchy.
Before becoming a herald was basically just a rando, whereas everyone else, people had at least heard of their names before. With the Oathpact, the fused are not able to escape Braze, but they can try to get the heralds to break, which then allows them to return to Roshar. So they start this torture campaign, basically, and being like, fine, if you're going to trap us here on Braze, we will just make this actually living hell for you until you let us out. And those are the cycles that we see. Those are the cycles that the Rosharans see as the desolations happening over and over again and becoming closer and closer together as the heralds kind of wear down and aren't able to withstand the torture for as long in between.
The heralds did have roles that they served in each desolation as they are coming back, kind of mimicking the fuse with an insane amount of knowledge, both practical and tactical on the battlefield, but also important aspects of mining, smithing, construction,
and
organization.
Just like culture.
Yes.
Yeah. How to organize yourselves.
And to pass that information on to the individuals, is something that we hear spoken by the heralds in Way of Kings and throughout the Stormlight Archive. We know, for example, that Yezerin taught leadership, Videl trained the surgeons, and Kalak taught them how to cast bronze. We'll go over specifics of each herald in the future, but they all had a role to play in addition to being the fighters and the leaders on the battlefield.
And then, of course, they also helped to train and guide the orders of Knights Radiant. We'll also talk a little bit more about the founding of the Knights Radiant and kind of how that worked in relationship to the Heralds a little bit later in the episode.
I do think that another question that we can pose is how long between the founding of the Oathpact and the development of the Knights Radiant, and then is there another gap in time before the Heralds take the leadership role in the Knights Radiant? I'm curious if the Knights Radiant sprung up without the direct purposeful creation by a herald.
Correct.
Yeah.
The Knights Radiant were basically started by the Spren, who were like, hey, these heralds seem to be doing cool stuff. I think we could do that too. Like, we're tiny pieces of honor. If we just meld with a human, we could kind of be like a herald. So that starts to happen completely independently of the heralds. And not to jump ahead in our episode, but essentially Ashar then is like, okay, if this is happening anyway, we should control it, and steps in to do that.
Yeah, and I'm curious how many desolations or just how many years go past before the first Spren are making the first bonds, and will we ever get a look into that time period? Because it would be fascinating to know those answers.
It would certainly be cool to see the first Spren kind of decide to make the bond and how that happened. That would be like a cute novella. After thousands of years of torture and desolation, we see this battle in the prelude to the Stormlight Archive where the Heralds miraculously somehow all survive the fighting, except, of course, for Taln. The 9 survivors decide that they are going to break the Oathpact and they don't want to go back to Braze, and they all just cross their fingers and are like, I think Taln will be enough. We'll be good. No more desolations will happen, right? Okay, bye.
This, of course, sets up the bummer time for Taln. As well as the events of the Stormlight Archive, everything that we see after. But it is important to have this history and this understanding, because what follows the last desolation is known as the Era of Solitude. These 9 heralds are going to persist on Roshar and grow more and more unstable, in part because of the intense trauma that they dealt with and are trying to process and failing at processing. They should not have survived and would not have survived except for the incredible amount of investiture that they've taken on. So they've warped their spirit web to take more torture than a spirit web probably should be able to.
Yes, exactly. This is an important point. We just got this word of Brandon at last year's Dragonsteel convention, and he pointed out the length of time that we're dealing with in the Stormlight Archive, which was also one of the things that really struck me as soon as I opened Way of Kings for my most recent reread, was that the events in that very first prelude are happening 4,500 years in the past. And if we think about our Earth timeline and like what we know about societies and people just 2,000 years ago, it's not a lot. So kind of putting that into context, I think, is really important to try to understand just how long ago these events were and why we don't have that much information about the heralds, and then also why the heralds are so messed up.
Yeah, it's also something we can place in context of other cognitive entities, these type 2 invested entities that we talk about so much. We also kind of fear for some of the known type 2 invested entities because we don't want them to become the heralds. We know that path the heralds is on is a path of madness.
Yeah, and I think before this word of Brandon, it was easy for me to look at all of these type 2 entities and think, why aren't they the same? Why? It must be something else acting on the heralds. It can't just be because they're a cognitive entity, because their behavior, their attributes are so different from the other ones that we know. And Brandon just really clarified this by specifying that Kelsier is a cognitive shadow for 300 years at this point, which is a lot. Vasher is a cognitive shadow for somewhere around 700 years by this point. Also a lot. That's a long time to be alive. You kind of start to get messed up. But the Heralds have been around for 7,000 years. 7,000. So orders of magnitude more than Vasher.
And if there is a kind of scale of degradation that is happening, then each year the trauma is getting worse. The damage is getting worse, and it's compounding on itself in a way that it might not just be a linear decline for these entities. It could be significantly worse, or just like the trauma makes it worse. It's like a boost of how quickly your soul is decaying or would otherwise be able to hang around. And their trauma is a bummer. It's kind of the original sin in some respects of Roshar, and all of the characters now are dealing with the decisions that were made by the Heralds in creating the Oathpact and in their decision to remain and be tortured, their decisions to give up the fight and leave Taln. In some respects, that leads to an exclamation from Taln. He's like, this is so wonderful. You've had so much time. You're so much more prepared, and you are actually like ahead of the game. You're more ready for anything that your ancestors would not have been prepared for in the same respect. But I also think when we look at the other heralds in depth, as we're about to, we will see how truly damaging this experience is for them, and maybe for everyone else too.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Taln, he survives as the only herald who is holding the Oathpact together for over 4,000 years. Of course, at the end of Way of Kings, we see him being returned to Roshar as the true desolation begins. We do have a word of Brandon that Taln did not break under the torture. That is not why he has come back to Roshar. The pact has broken for a different reason that we do not know. So that's certainly a big question mark that we are all eager to have answered.
Yes, and easy to overlook this point. There's so much going on, and the climax of Oathbringer, and you just have like all of these different aspects. You're trying to learn and download all of this information. But Taln is successfully resisting torture. Odium is building a backup plan to get around Taln and to like circumvent the Oathpact. This is called the Everstorm. That is the loophole. The Everstorm does eventually show up, but the fused are released from Braze before the Everstorm, which means that the Oathpact failed. Some aspect failed.
Wait, is it just that the fused are jumping into the storm and so they're like, bye, we're not going to torture you anymore? And then Talon is just like, oh, I'm not being tortured. I'll go back to Roshar.
No, there is a breaking of the Oathpact that happens and allows the fused to leave and to start getting on to return. They are starting a desolation the normal way. But then Odium also had the Everstorm, which he was planning on unleashing, which would have allowed them to get to Roshar anyways. But they didn't only need to go in the Everstorm. They also went the normal way, which is, again, why I'm taking a moment to break this down.
Yeah, that's good.
The question is, what caused the Oathpact to break?
Right.
We will explore that more in the future. And I know there are a couple of people out there who have read the early chapter releases of Wind and Truth. We're not going to go into detail about any of those things. So just keep your little opinions to yourself.
Yeah.
And we certainly will find our way there.
So at this point, the Oathpact is no longer. This is because of Yezrian's super death at the end of Oathbringer that breaks the Oathpact, although according to word of Brandon, there is a quote-unquote ghost of the Oathpact that remains in existence.
I do think this ghost of the Oathpact is going to be important in some way, probably, and maybe to your chagrin, in the realm of reforging some aspect of the Oathpact.
No.
You're going to like use the ghost of the Oathpact. You know, there has to be something that kind of connects back to the original Oathpact And that's this ghost I think Brandon is talking about.
I can't speculate about this.
We can't speculate about anything because this is an information-only podcast.
Yes. There was a pretty good explanation of this on the Coppermind. I did not independently verify this, so if it's not 100% correct, don't come for me. Go edit the Coppermind. It said, heralds are similar to Spren in that they are essentially investiture that is self-aware. This is due to their nature as resurrected cognitive shadows. Because of this, they can be trapped in a gemstone, like a spren, via racium. The properties of racium include conducting investiture, and so that racium sort of conducts the herald into a gemstone, similar to how a spren would be in a fabrial. Then the trapped herald's bond to the Oathpact is severed, which causes the soul to disintegrate back into a normal soul. And then because it's now normal, it goes on to the beyond, which means that the herald is permanently dead and the Oathpact is no more.
I love this information, and I hate the fact I can't speculate wildly on it because, man, do I want to go deep, deep into the magical deep end on what it means to trap a herald and what can maybe be done with that, how it applies to the other type 2s around the Cosmere, and maybe what Thydekar is working on as well. But thank you for that information. I think it's important to make that connection to Spren and perhaps also the Unmade, who we see being trapped in the larger specialty gemstones.
Yeah, that's a great connection to make. Let's move on to talking about the heralds as individuals.
Yes, take a deep breath, reclaim some of your sanity, some of your enthusiasm, and it's important to remember these heralds are people. They do still have the remnants of their mortal selves, even if they are warped in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think as we have learned about the shards, the vessel is important in defining the shard. There are investiture, there's gravity, there's intent, there's so much going on, but the vessel themselves, who they are, is important. In the same way, I think knowing who the heralds are individually is important and maybe would then also allow us to speculate further if we truly understood them. Here's how we're going to distribute this information. We're going to give some fast facts, maybe some stats on each of the heralds. Oh, it's going to be like a Pokemon card. We're just going to kind of read off the main stats and abilities of each herald, and then we'll go into further discussion about them as individuals. So would you take over reading the names of the heralds, and I'll provide some other fast facts for them.
Absolutely. They've been around for a long time, so they got a lot of names. We're going to start, of course, with number 1, Yezrian, who in the Vorin religion is known as Yezereze Elin. Other names that he is known by is Yesi, which is his name in Iri and Rira, and he's known as Yezir in Azir.
His domain is leadership and ruling. Divine attributes are considered protecting and leading. He is, of course, the patron of the Wind Runners.
He is said to appear to a modern Rosharan like an Alethi person would. He's got tan skin, dark hair, dark eyes, and he was a king. Prior to becoming a herald, he was known as a powerful, charismatic, thoughtful, and kind leader.
His role during the Desolations is to train humanity's leaders and their kings to allow for better overall government during this trying time of the Desolations.
In some cultures, he is revered as the only god. I think it's likely that over time, the Herald of Kings became the king of heralds, which then elevates him above the other heralds. And some cultures have also kind of conflated Yezrian and the Stormfather as being one and the same. However, we know that they are not the same.
After abandoning the Oathpact, Yezrian descends into madness like the others. We see him several times as a drunk beggar, dirty, unkempt, speaking nonsensically or in gibberish, which we have sometimes speculated could actually be the dawn chant that he is speaking in. Occasionally, he does snap back to reality and have moments of lucidity. We can speculate that that might be when there's some type of burst of investiture used other places on the planet, because he's so connected, as all the heralds are, to those large bursts of investiture.
Yeah. Yezrian, of course, as we just mentioned a little bit earlier, he is killed by Moash via a Racium dagger. His soul is then conducted into a gemstone, and his connection with the other heralds is severed. The Oathpact is broken. R.I.P. Yezrian.
You were the number one, and now you're number done.
Harsh.
It's true. It's not my fault. He's dead for real. And
number one herald, number one death.
Exactly. There is not only speculation, but true division in his number one status, because the societies or cultures that are most likely to elevate Yezrian are to the east in Roshar. The more west you go, the more he seems to kind of just become another one of the heralds and not necessarily first among the heralds.
Yeah, there's an interesting circular kind of nature to the heralds where number 1 and number 10 are both said to be these charismatic leaders, kind of in different ways, and we'll get to that other leader at the end of this list.
Yeah, because we need to go to number 2. And number 2 is our scary boy, Nail.
Nail, who is known as Nalan Elin in the Vorin religion. In Shinovar, he is known as Nin Sun God. And in Makabak, he is known as Naku the Judge.
Domain is law and order. Divine attributes are just and confident. He is the patron of the Skybreakers
and a Skybreaker himself.
Uniquely a Skybreaker himself.
Yes. Nail appears to be Azish. He has dark skin with a pale crescent-shaped scar on his cheek, and he's typically wearing an Azish constable's uniform, which is black and silver.
As the patron and a member of the Skybreakers, Nail's obsessed, and his madness revolves around the obsession of following the letter of the law. He does not at this time, maybe he never did, have confidence in his ability to discern justice and morality. And so he is putting emphasis and maybe overemphasizing the strict letters of the law. We know that Nail is the only herald who is also a Knight Radiant himself, like further binding himself in some way to the rules of the Skybreakers. He not only loved the Oathpact, he was like, give me more powers. I just want to be bound all the time.
Needs structure, that man.
Very much so. Feels like a loose cannon, and he's like, please
put rules on me.
Establish some boundaries.
Aside from being a herald with powers that are granted by his honor blade, because he also has a Sprenbond as a 5th ideal Skybreaker, he has a living Sprenblade. So he's got 2 blades, and he does have a little extra power because of these 2 kind of avenues of power feeding into him.
That's a scary point because, of course, he has also abandoned the humans in their fight and kind of sided with the native people of Roshar in the Singers.
He really loves Ishar. This is a pattern that we're going to see. People love Ishar, especially the heralds, and he often seeks out Ishar for guidance. In fact, after Ahariadium, which is when the heralds abandoned the Oathpact, Ishar told Nail to prevent another desolation by killing any Knights Radiant that started to pop up. So this task that we see Nail completing throughout the Stormlight Archive was given to him by Ishar.
We, of course, see the ramifications of that path, but when he sees Venli's Voidspren, he's upset, thinking that the Desolation is coming, but Venli convinces him that his own actions are truly the cause of the Voidspren returning, making him into, like, his own worst enemy.
Yes. He thinks that she must be talking about the dealings that he's been having with Gavilar. And so he's like, okay, Venli, this is how you're going to kill Gavilar to prevent this whole thing from happening. So Ishar tells Nail, stop the Desolations, kill all of the Knights Radiant. And then Nail tells Venli, this is how you kill Gavilar. Gavilar dies. And of course, here we are now in the Stormlight Archive.
At some point, it was Nail that obtained Nightblood and gives it to Szeth after his resurrection. We do not know the transition point for Nightblood, though we assume it came to Roshar with Vasher, and it was separated from Vasher, which is maybe why Azure/Vivenna has arrived on Roshar, because she is thinking, you lost the Nightblood machine.
Idiot.
Yeah. Just be like, and you've given it to the Heralds and other
Clearly,
crazy people.
He needs more power. He already has 2 different kinds of shard blades and then also Nightblood.
Yeah, for a moment, he was a triple wielder.
Oh my god.
He had 3 swords, and one is basically just a nuke. So he just drops that in the fight.
That's actually kind of funny, because then he has like every iteration of a shard blade.
Yes,
he has the
all
honor
the
blades,
copies,
which were the original, and then the slightly diluted version, which is the Spren blade, and then the slightly more diluted and perverted version, which is Nightblood. I hope he did some good scholarship while he had all 3 of those in his possession. That would be a good, comparison trial.
Unfortunately, I think we need to go to the next couple of heralds to get that scholarship avenue in the front of mind.
Herald number 3 is Chana, or also known as Chanaranach Elen. Her nickname is Chana. She is, her domain is kind of unknown.
Yeah, it's called the domain of the common man at
That's
times.
how, like, the average people on Roshar refer to her, but we've not really been given a lot of actual concrete details about her role as a herald.
I'm going to throw this out there. She's got some Hufflepuff vibes.
Love it.
And just the house of the common people, and also everybody knows the best house. Her divine attributes are bravery and obedience. She is the patron of the Dust Bringers, one of the more exciting orders that we are hoping to explore more in Book 5.
Yes. Her current status and whereabouts are unknown. This is one of the heralds that we don't have a whole lot of info about.
Word of Peter
Yes.
is, quote, Chana has definitely been seen on screen by at least one character at least one time in the first 2 books, end quote. Thank you, Peter, for that perfectly vague description. Did they have a line in the first 2 books? Were they seen by a character from afar? Was the person across the shattered plains, and technically light would have bounced off them, got to their eye, and they could have seen them?
No idea. Really, the only other thing that we can say about Chana is that as she is depicted with red hair, there has been a lot of speculation that there is perhaps a connection between Chana and Shallan. Maybe Shallan's mom, maybe Shallan herself is Chana. And if you want all of the super interesting details on that theory, you can go back in the feed and see our episode on Shallan's mom. I think it's one of our best.
Episode 101, Who is Shallan's Mother? A great look and a very speculative look at this question of Chana and their relation potentially to Shallan. Let's move to the next one.
Next up, we've got Videl, who is known in the Vorin religion as Videladev Elin. As far as we know at this point, she does not have any other names or nicknames.
Videl's domain is health, medicine, and doctors, surgeons. Their divine attributes are loving and healing, and they are the patron of the edge dancers.
Overall, she sounds like a great lady.
Yeah.
Loving, healing people up. I'm into it.
Edge dancers always seem great. They're also incredibly graceful, and Maya is an edge dancer. And so I'm just prone to think of all of them Adolin-esque.
Aw, cute.
Less Lift-esque, because she's a game breaker.
Yes.
So she's the weird one out.
She's special.
Yeah.
Videl would also appear Alethi to modern Rosharans, so that's the tan skin, dark hair. During the Desolations, she would train humanity's surgeons. That makes sense. And the kind of fun fact about Videl is that she's often depicted with golden keys, and they have this colloquial saying, Vev's golden keys, which is said to be a reference to a Rosharan myth. We have no idea what the myth is, if it's based on actual historical events, or any other details.
I hope that there is a side quest at some point to find Vev's golden keys.
Ooh, that would be fun.
Like a fabrial, a super fabrial of their design, you know, for pure Truth Watcher-esque healing, but not with a Truth Watcher nearby. And I would love if there's kind of like an Indiana Jones quest for some of our people in the future.
What if it's a fabrial from Ashen? It's like the last surviving Ashenite fabrial.
Or a way to unlock and understand a fabrial.
Ooh.
And to kind of like maybe...
Her keys unlock the grand apparatus.
There it is. That's what we need. More Cosmere speculation. We said no Stormlight Archive speculation, and now you're just bringing in the grand apparatus.
Everything, yeah. Okay, Herald number 5 is Palaya, also known as Palaya Elen. Her nickname is Polly.
Which, so far, best nickname, in my opinion.
Really cute.
Because it's the one that I can say easiest. Domain of knowledge and learning, divine attributes of the learned, and giving. Palali is the patron of the Truth Watchers. Perhaps the order that I'm most interested in, because I have pre-built my Cosmere RPG character to potentially go down the path of a Truth Watcher. So much fun. And if you want a episode all about the Cosmere RPG, you can join us on Patreon, get those special bonus episodes.
Then you can also talk to us in the Discord, where we've been having lots of fun conversations about the RPG. Palaya was likely a prominent scholar before the Desolations, and she may be one of the heralds that are in close proximity to Teravangian, according to Word of Brandon. There are a couple, and Palaya might be one of them. She also might be an Ardent at the Palaneum. We know that there is an Ardent at the Palaneum that is seen by Shallan, who has been confirmed to be a herald. We just don't know which one. And because these last 3 lady heralds that we've talked about don't have a whole lot of info, it kind of could be any of them. I think it makes sense that it would be Palaya, because she is the knowledge and learning herald, so hanging out in the big library makes sense to me.
It does seem very on brand.
Yes. Moving on to a lady herald that we know a little bit more about, Shalash, our 6th herald, who is known by the name of Shalash Elin in the Vorin religion. She's also known as a Pan Lady of Dreams in Emul, and Ash is her nickname. In Shinovar, they know her as Shush, daughter God.
Domain of beauty, honesty, and art, divine attribute of creativity and honesty, patron, of course, of the Light Weavers. And as you said, we do see Shalash a lot more than the other heralds. Especially,
she's really the only lady herald who's had any time on screen.
Yes, and we get a bunch of moments with her, starting in Way of Kings, kind of destroying images of herself, but then, of course, escalating in Oathbringer and in Rhythm of War as her love interest, her maybe in the past longtime lover, is Taln. And so as Taln comes back, it seems Ash is maybe strengthened by his presence. And at least I hope so. At least I hope they have, a Ohana-esque situation.
Yeah.
Just like when nobody gets left behind, then they get stronger. And it's when they broke apart is they started to get weaker.
Yeah, I mean, she certainly does have a relationship with Taln, seemingly maybe romantic. Kind of hard to tell because Taln is so out of it. She's like really just in a caretaker role as we see her.
It's definitely not the time for wooing when Taln's condition is so low.
Shalash is said to appear Makabaki and Shin. She has dark skin, long black hair, and Shin-like eyes, which do not have the epicanthic folds. As you said, she has a compulsion. Her magical malady is this compulsion to destroy depictions of herself in art. This seems to relate to her order of the Lightweavers and this divine attribute of being creative. Kind of unclear exactly how that relates to her personality before becoming a herald. Presumably she would have been like an artist before that, but we don't know a whole lot about who she was before the Oathpact.
We do know a little bit of information about how she feels or outwardly expresses her disdain for those who see the heralds, including herself, as divine.
She does not like being considered a godlike figure.
Which reminds me a little bit of Lightsong from Warbreaker, kind of a rejection of the court of the gods and those practices.
Absolutely. They just take completely different avenues to expressing that. Lightsong is like, let me tell you some jokes about how I'm not really a god. And Shash is like, let me destroy everything that you worship.
Hell hath no fury, as the saying goes.
Yes. She lived in Shinovar for a while after Ahariadium, but when they started worshiping her, she was, peace, I'm out of here.
Shalash represents one of those great bits of information that leads to tremendous speculation because it is part of my belief, and I'll just leave us with a question so we don't go too far down the rabbit hole. Here's the question. Why is Shalash destroying images or artwork pieces that include her? Why does she hate those who consider the heralds divine? And it is my speculation that I've said more than once on this podcast that it is an example of trying to break the reinforcement of a cognitive shadow from belief of other people. If you have people thinking about the survivor, then the concept of survivor gains weight, cognitive shadow-esque weight, cognitive realm weight. If Shalash is trying to break connections to her own divinity, I think it's because she doesn't want the extra energy coming at the heralds.
I hear that. I think it could be more mundane in this circumstance. I think her perspective is pretty justified because the heralds are basically martyrs, where humanity is like, here, take these 10 people, and then they try to make those 10 people feel better about being martyred by worshiping them and just being like, oh, you're such a good person. Thank you so much. You saved the world. You're a god.
Right.
But really, she's like, we were just tortured for thousands of years. I'm not a god. You just sacrificed me.
Exactly. And so thank you for presenting that very real justification that doesn't require any extra magic or cognitive realm explaining. Now you, the listener, you tell us what you think is the rationale, simple, straightforward, and clear. Are there more magical reasons for why Shalash is doing what she is doing?
On this topic of her relationship to the Oathpact, she does regret abandoning the Oathpact and abandoning Taln to hold the Oathpact alone, but that does not mean that she is at all interested in re-engaging with the Oathpact in any way. She is absolutely uninterested in protecting Roshar. She's very much just like, I'm gonna take care of me and my friend Taln here. I don't care what any of y'all are doing. And she finds Taln by posing as a washerwoman named Palm in order to find a particular painting of herself, of course, so that she can destroy it. That painting leads her to Mraize, who then gives her the information about where Taln is. And so there's this kind of complicated web that eventually leads them to reconnect. What is Mraize's reasoning for trying to bring them together? I don't know if we have that answer.
Certainly opens the door for speculation, but we're going to move right along and instead say that after the Battle of Thalen Field, Shalash and Taln are considered guests.
Guests in quotations, because are they there voluntarily? Can they leave if they want to? No.
Yeah, so the Alethi royals are holding them captive.
In a nice way.
In a nice way. And they are providing information about the Oathpact and Ishar. So all setting up the final climactic 10 days that we have in Stormlight Archive 5.
Shalash is planned to be a point of view character in the back half of the series, so 6 through 10. But as a very interesting Word of Brandon pointed out, the 10 books of the Stormlight Archive are all intended to focus on a specific order of Knights Radiant. Of course, we have already had the book that focuses on the Lightweavers. That would be Shallan's book, Words of Radiance. So Shalash seemingly will not be a Lightweaver in her point of view book, and or there will just be a different order of Radiance that will be the focus of the book that includes her flashbacks.
Yeah, I do think this is a little bit how Rhythm of War, you get less clear distinctions between whose book is it.
Right.
Because there's aspects of Venli, there's aspects of Navani, and books in the second half, I think, could fall in that line as there is a main character, maybe one that we have met or one that we have not, but Shalash would then serve as the secondary character. And I would love if there were POV flashbacks to her becoming a herald.
Oh, yes, of course.
That time period is what I want to know.
Totally. Okay, our last Lady Herald is Batar, and she is known as Bata Elin in the Vorin religion. She goes by Dova. That's her alias working with Taravangian.
And there's no known domain that we can find for Batar. We assume that they have one, but it's not as easily or readily available as the others. Batar does have divine attributes, which are wisdom and carefulness. They are the patron of the El Scholars.
Batar is currently living as an ardent in Kharbranth, again under the name Dova. As Dova, she approached Taravangian and she warned him of a coming desolation. That is what prompted him to seek out Szeth after King Gavilar's assassination. Lots of questions that arise out of that sentence. How did she know that a desolation was coming? What did she say to him specifically about Szeth, if anything? There's a whole bunch of details we don't have about that interaction, but I do think that it's notable that a herald kicked off that sequence of events.
Yes, and it certainly leaves us questioning, was there a slightly earlier domino that went off that kind of triggered her? Because as we speculated in that episode 101 with Chana, is there something going on with Chana that maybe friend Batar became aware of and was just like, I'm going to put these two dots together and these two actually equal desolation.
Man, and then we also start to see how much Szeth is being bopped around like a pinball by the heralds, with Nail telling Venli to hire him to kill Gavilar, and then Batar telling Taravangian to go find him to do all of his dirty work. I am very interested to see where else the dirty little fingerprints of our heralds are on the events that we have so far seen.
Yes, because all of the information that we are getting right now does kind of lead to questions along the lines of, did the heralds caused their own downfall? Did they break away from the Oathpact, which then weakened them, which then made them mad and set up a way to like return into their Oathpact situation? Did they like find themselves back to what they were bound to always be a part of, the Oathpact?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
These are the fun questions that we're not going to take time to speculate on because there is more to learn about Batar.
As Dova, after she has that interaction with Taravangian, she becomes part of the diagram and she assists Taravangian with all of his diagram duties and business. And then when the diagram is disbanded, Taravangian specifically instructs his followers not to trust Dova because he has seen other heralds and how unstable they are. And so he starts to distrust Dova or Batar and wants some space in between him and his followers and that crazy herald lady.
There are so many questions, and instead, if you're comfortable with it, let's move on to Kalak.
Oh, Kalak. Yes. Kalak is known as Kelek Elen in the Vorin religion. There is a vowel shift sometime in the history of the language here that changes the A's to E's. Otherwise, his name stays the same. In Iri and Rira, he is known as Kalai. And of course, his alias is Risteris as a founding member, leader of the Sons of Honor.
Domain of metalworking and smithing, divine attributes of a resolute and builder. He is the patron of the will shapers.
And of course, we see him alive and kicking in lasting integrity, acting as their high judge.
Not a great judge, but also not a position that he had always held. He was once upon a time considered to be a decisive and a person that would be sought after for their counsel. And it is once again seen the magical malady kind of flipping that, turning that strength into a weakness. He is now incredibly indecisive and sets up the tension that is eventually broken by Maya in that scene in Lasting Integrity.
Yeah, seemingly previously he had a lot of confidence. As you say, he was decisive. And when we meet him, he is deeply fearful, very paranoid. He is a recluse. He's really introverted, super anxious, the opposite of what he used to be known for. He is also said to appear Alethi, although he is a little bit shorter. I think most of the time Alethi are quite tall, and he's on the smaller side for a man. He's got kind of delicate features, wispy hair. He's said to have the appearance of an Alethi city administrator.
Yes, and that description is great. I, of course, imagine the Azish as matching this kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Very note-takey city administrator, of course. Like, that's going to be their strong suit. The perversions around Kalek are important to understand because he does seem to be maybe more connected. His position in Lasting Integrity and as the leader of the Sons of Honor mean that he's kind of got his fingers in a lot of different places.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of how the heralds have influenced current events, of course, as the leader of the Sons of Honor, we can guess that Kalak is at the root of many events that we have seen, including basically everything that Amaram is up to. You can trace it all back to Kalak.
He believes that humans and especially the bondsmiths are dangerous, having what seems to be a legitimate fear of them. I think this is probably related to the Oathpact itself, which he is trying to escape. He does not want to be on Roshar, and we're guessing that he's kind of still stuck in the system. I'm
curious if that fear also goes back to Ashen and the fear of
the
wielding
unchained
power, yes, and that can lead to some very catastrophic consequences.
That's a great guess and certainly makes as much sense. I think we've already witnessed the way that Dalinar is able to forge a pact, an agreement with a god. And if you can do it with a shard, you can certainly do it with a type 2 invested entity, even if they are Kalak. So I think he also has a very legitimate and real fear of, if there's a bondsmith around, I don't want to be around that bondsmith because they can make me go be tortured for another 7,000 years.
Yeah. Speaking of his aversion to torture, we say as if it's an unusual thing. His main focus is escaping the Rosharan system, presumably so that he can escape the cycle of desolations. Seemingly, he kind of lives in fear of being pulled back in, that eventually he will have to go back to Braze and be tortured, and he is not about that life. He thinks that Roshar is a lost cause. Like Shalash, he's not really interested in continuing to fight for it, and he just wants to hit the road Jack.
Maraise considers him to be a dangerous fighter, but Kalak does not have that same confidence in himself. And we also know that Kalak was present for the imprisonment of Ba'edo Mishram and regrets what happened to her.
Very fun fact there.
Certainly think the connection to the Unmade and that false desolation is going to be important, maybe in this next book, but also we think that the Unmade are going to get more emphasis in books 6 through 10 as well.
I think we could see more of Kalak in book 5 as we have that book blurb talking about how that's going to be one of the focuses, specifically the Ba'edo Mishram of it all. Okay, here's one of the big ones. We are on to Talenel, aka Talenelat Elen Stone Sinew. Obviously, he's also known as Talm. He's got a lot of names. In Tukar, he's known as Tuk. He's also known as Talat. He's called the Bearer of Agonies. The Sons of Honor call him the Great Prince, and the diagram calls him the Ancient of Stones. He's got a real, like, Daenerys Targaryen roster there.
Yeah, his resume is as broad as his shoulders, and Taln, he's our man. If he can't do it, none of the other heralds can.
Basically.
His domain is, of course, war, soldiers, and also suffering. His divine attributes are dependability and resourcefulness. He is the patron of the Stone Wards, and his description is always as a tall, dark-skinned man, extremely muscular, with broad shoulders. This is the epitome of a scary person on the battlefield.
Absolutely. And he is known for choosing battles that are extremely difficult to win. We hear this in the Way of Kings prelude. He's kind of always just choosing the hardest battle that most likely is going to be lost, and then he kind of goes ham and sacrifices himself but wins the battle.
During the Desolations, he was responsible for teaching humankind how to fight and training their soldiers. He, though, is not originally a general in that era of when the heralds are being selected. He is the common man, or at least the common soldier.
As more of a Kaladin-like figure who's just a basic soldier, but then takes it upon himself to train others.
Which could be something we could speculate on more about the future of Kaladin. Let's stay focused, though, because Brandon has said there is no one in the Cosmere who could beat Taln in his prime in a 1-in-1 battle.
No one in the whole Cosmere.
Yes, and I think we could make questions about like different magic systems in different situations, but in a straight fight, I'm putting my money on Taln. In a magical fight, I'm also putting my money on Taln because Brandon said that you should put your money on Taln.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, after centuries of torture on Braze, most of the time when we see Taln, he's basically catatonic. So we don't have a really good idea of what his kind of personality or affect is like. We do have some more details about his Shardblade, and there's mystery there.
Do you want to tell us more about the Shardblade mystery? Because he originally arrives to Kholinar with a weapon shaped like an enormous spike. It's described as long, narrow, and straight.
And then he arrives on the Shattered Plains with a shard blade that's described as wide and cleaver-like. And this blade screams when it's touched by a radiant, which means that it is a dead shard blade, not an honor blade at all.
So we have to imagine that either he always had shard blades and not an honor blade, or
You think he had two different shard blades?
Or the other option would be that the long, straight, spike-looking thing is his honor blade.
Yes, of course.
And this new one was swapped in for some reason to fool someone.
Correct.
And
somebody stole his honor blade.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that is the answer. However, the actual details of what happened here are unknown. They have been filled in. This mystery is solved in a Cosmere RPG campaign called The Stonewalker's Adventure, which was written by Brandon and is a canon story that fills in this gap. What happened to Taln's honor blade?
We mentioned up top, and we'll always mention that Taln did not break. And the reason for the final desolation is not because Taln broke the Oathpact. He was tortured for the entire time, never broke. Something else happened to start that. It also was not the Everstorm.
Right. Yeah. An interesting note here, obviously, once the Oathpact, or not the Oathpact, but once the torture is relieved and he is returned to Roshar, he shows up in Kholinar. Hoyd somehow knows that he's coming, knows that he's gotten back to Roshar, and knows that he'll be in Kholinar first. So that's just another question to throw out there. What's going on there? How did Hoyd know?
Yeah, and I have a question about, are the cities, the Dawn cities, or just any city around Roshar associated strongly with one of the heralds?
Oh,
do they appear
sure, yeah, almost
in
like
those
an
locations?
Oathgate
Yes, an
kind of
Oathgate
thing.
for them.
Yeah.
And so you wouldn't have all of your heralds pop up into the same exact spot because then one big attack and maybe they're all dead. Instead, you position them around the board like super entities dropped into different regions.
I love that idea because we hear in one of the visions that Dalinar sees, a Knight Radiant tells him that Alethkar is where all of the Knights Radiant and wannabe Knights Radiant congregate for training. So it would make sense if the herald responsible for training your soldiers, your fighters, immediately appeared in Alethkar in Kholinar.
With those people who were like new recruits.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and they would all actually know that. So Hoyd, all he had to know was
that Taln
the heralds
was
are
coming
coming back. Yeah, and Taln would always come back to the same location, Kholinar.
I love this speculation.
But we're not supposed to be speculating. It's just so much fun. Let us know what you think in the comments below.
After Taln arrives in Kholinar, he's brought to the Shattered Plains, where Dalinar and Elokar think that he is just a run-of-the-mill madman. They place him in the care of the Ardents, and then shortly thereafter, the Ghostbloods and the Sons of Honor find out about his presence, and they investigate.
Yes, one by using Shallan to do the investigation on their behalf. Amaram shows up and attempts to kind of copy everything that Taln is saying, but he already believes that Taln is the Herald of War. He's just trying to get some proof, but he himself believes that this madman is Taln.
Yes.
And it's a little bit of a, self-fulfilling prophecy. He wants all of these things to be true, but he happened to be right this time.
Yeah. Amaram then later breaks into the monastery and abducts Taln. He keeps him hidden in his camps for quite a long time until eventually, as we previously mentioned, Shalash comes and rescues him during the Battle of Thaylen Field.
Taln specifically seems to recover his sanity and awareness when exposed to high amounts of investiture, like when Dalinar opens up the perpendicularity at Thaylen Field.
Shalash thinks that perhaps Ishar could help heal his condition. I don't think that that's true, but Ishar also seems to have a lot of curious powers that we're going to talk about in just a moment.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if it is connected, pun intended, to memory, because there is everyone else, and then there's Tom. Everyone else is having magical maladies, maybe because of their breaking of the Oathpact. It's possible that Tom's mental state is not magically declining in the same way. What he's dealing with is simply post-traumatic stress from being tortured for a long period of time, rather than the same exact decline in his state. And so maybe he could be healed from that.
But he does improve with the perpendicularity.
Definitely. And I think all of the heralds have a reaction to the perpendicularities being used, but that's why maybe Ishar is pointed to as someone that can help, because Ishar can control connection and perhaps the memory of what happened. And so like he just needs to be absolved of the trauma that he's most recently experienced. And at that point, he would then start to decline at the same rate that all the other heralds did, because he's still doing his job. That's what I hope for Tom.
I think that this is just an example of the heralds kind of putting undue respect or reverence on Ishar and thinking that Ishar can do more than you should probably trust him to do. Before we move on to Ishar, I think it's just important to point out that Taln is also a planned point of view character in the back half of Stormlight Archive.
Yeah, same rules might apply that we laid out for Shalash as well.
Right.
So let's do it. Let's wrap up with the OG bondsmith, perhaps Unchained bondsmith, maybe the person who is most responsible for everything that has happened since the destruction on Ashen.
For better or for worse, he does seem to be responsible for a lot.
This is Ishar, the responsible one. Just kidding. Hit us with the actual names.
Ishar is known in the Vorin religion as Ishi Elen. He is also known as Tezim in Tukar, where he is the god priest. He is known as the binder of gods, and in Shinovar they call him Ishu Sun God. Another one of his nicknames is Tashi.
Domain of luck, divine attribute of pious and guiding. He is the patron of the bondsmiths. Ishar has so much that we could do an entire episode only on Ishar and then speculate wildly on
all the things,
everything that is going to happen, because as I said, I think Ishar is most responsible almost at every point in time. Like we went through a lot of the timeline today, and whatever happened on Ashen probably connected to Ishar. The decision to come to Roshar connected to Ishar. The decision to leave Shinovar and invade probably connected to Ishar. And on and on and on, everything seems to be connected to Ishar. You're mentioning how everyone is kind of weirdly his friend, weirdly respects him. We know that a master of connection and someone who on Scadrial can influence connection via their metals is able to make friends easier. That people will just like them more than they otherwise would.
That's an interesting call out.
I think that the worst aspect of long lives and lots of power is that if you're making bad decisions, a little bit like the Lord Ruler, you're constantly trying to correct your own bad decisions, which leads to more bad decisions. It's like you're not capable of getting yourself out of the puzzle that you built for yourself. And you just make it worse and worse every time. That's what I think is going on. Basically, the entire Stormlight Archive is Ishar's fault.
To modern Rosharans, Ishar would look Shin. He's got pale skin. He does not have epicanthic folds, and he's usually depicted with gray hair and a beard. He has quite a strong appearance and looks like a warrior. So while maybe he looks a little bit more on the older side, he is still quite hardy.
Yeah, Shalash describes him more like a battlefield commander rather than a wise old scholar. So a crafty individual, but also maybe not the one you imagine down on the front lines.
Yeah. On Ashen, Ishar was the person who discovered how to travel in between worlds and therefore brought humans to Roshar. So at least that is one thing that we can say he is responsible for.
He's currently acting as the god priest of Tukar under the name Tezim. His reign as god priest also corresponds with the war between Tukar and Amul over the city of Sesemelek's Dar, the Amuli capital, and one of the most ancient cities in the world, according to Sigil.
Why does Ishar want control over one of the most ancient cities in the world is a question that I think we should log away in our little brains.
And never forget, Kabsil, the greatest ardent.
Oh, goodness.
Kabsil's lessons about the Dawncities.
Oh, yes.
I think is what is going on here. And if there is also a connection, like we mentioned, with Taln always arriving at Kholinar, then maybe this is Ashar's city.
Maybe.
And he wants it because it is a center of his power on Roshar.
Okay.
This is too much speculation for this episode,
it
but
is.
keep all of these things in mind as we go forward here.
Seemingly, Ishar was always a charismatic leader, someone that was trusted and followed loyally. Obviously, his people trusted him to go to a different planet, so that's a lot of trust. And as we mentioned, most of the heralds still consider him to be really wise and go to him for advice, which when we meet him, it's like, why would you ever ask this crazy person for advice? But a lot of the actions that the heralds have taken and that they continue to take are done based on Ishar's quote-unquote guidance and knowledge.
Yeah, you know who doesn't go to Ishar for advice? Taln. Taln doesn't go to Ishar for advice because Ishar's advice gets Taln tortured for a long time.
And then Ishar is the other herald who gets elevated to kind of main god, king god status. For him, it's mostly the cultures in the West that consider him in this way. And he is known as the god of gods, as well as the binder of the world, which is a fascinating title.
Yeah, he was never a warrior before the Oathpact, and the Stormfather said that he would be considered average skilled among all of the heralds, though he easily defeats a group of trained windrunners at the end of Rhythm of War. So that's trying to match the power levels.
Tells us something about
Exactly. Be like,
the skill.
You couldn't take on the average of the heralds, let alone one of the true greats or any of the top tier heralds. But I think that Ashar's religious fervor that he builds around himself, this cult of personality, but for him it's like justified. It's not justified if your cult of personality is around a regular human, but he has elevated himself and is godlike in many ways. I think the power of connection is truly one of the more dangerous things in the Cosmere, certainly in the Rosharan system, and it may be that's what Kalak is so afraid of, why a bondsmith is so terrifying to Odium when he sees Dalinar and he says, you know, we killed you. We put all of this emphasis on those aspects, but what Dalinar is at least doing in part is using the power of a bondsmith to temporarily resurrect, temporarily show honors like power to Odium, to scare Odium. And if that is possible, I would be scared too. What do you think in regards to Ashar and maybe some of his magical maladies as well?
I think bondsmiths in general do have a lot of power and are going to be scary. They are bonded to Godspren, and therefore maybe we can say they have more of that god power than other Orders of Radiance or maybe other heralds in Ashar's case. But he seems to take this to the extreme, and his magical malady is megalomania. He just thinks that he is truly the greatest thing since sliced bread and wants more and more power, believes that he should be worshipped. However, like Taln, we see that he regains some sanity when he's exposed to a lot of investiture, like when he opens a perpendicularity and when Navani bonds the sibling.
He is currently in possession of his own honor blade, though at one time it was held by Szeth's father, which sets up Szeth's journey back and desire to go back to Shinovar to figure out how that honor blade was removed and if something dangerous has happened in Shinovar.
Ishar is described as being the founder of the Oathpact, and seemingly this means that he is the one who designed it and how it would work. He is also the person who, when the Knights Radiant started popping up, he instructed them on how to organize themselves, put them into the orders that they're in, and then gave them principles to live by as an attempt to prevent what had happened on Ashen. Ishar's just out here giving structure to things, putting boundaries on things, just the big daddy to Nail, who's like, yes, please, give me boundaries.
He describes himself, in my opinion weirdly, as the sole bearer of the Oathpact, which is not a title that he earned. This is false valor. What's that called?
Okay, here's my thought. We don't know what sent Taln back to Roshar. Something happened with the Oathpact.
Correct, yes.
Could it be that Ishar
brought
steals
him back?
His kind of connection to the Oathpact and takes Taln's role on himself, which kind of like kicks Taln out of his position and puts it all on the shoulders of Ishar.
Oh my gosh, that would be the most megalomaniac thing to do.
Exactly,
is you see this actual champion, this person, like kind of like Dalinar, embarrassing all of the other high princes and whatnot. Like he's doing the thing, he's walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And Taln is torturing the torture while Ishar is living a life of luxury. And we know he probably was the first to be like, we'll just leave Taln there.
Ishar,
Yeah, Ishar was definitely like
he's the one that was like, I think this will work. We can just leave it Taln there and like that'll probably be enough. It's cool, guys.
Yeah, and so that ate away at him, and he then wanted to steal the glory of Taln by removing and like focusing the Oathpact. That would actually be a non-Chana explanation for the end of the Oathpact. You're saying that it basically shifted Taln's responsibility over to just himself.
Yeah.
And then...
But obviously because he was not on Braze when he did that, it was broken and it released the fuse.
Yeah, he still messed up. It didn't work.
He was like, I'll do it, guys. Just kidding. I'm not in the right place.
Oh, man, that is a great theory. I love it. Let us know what you think and how Ishar could have impacted the end of the Oathpact.
And we see him attempt things sort of similar to that when he meets with Dalinar. He tries to steal Dalinar's connection to the Stormfather and take that power on himself. And then he also even tries to supplant Dalinar as Odium's opponent. He's just trying to do all the things. Like I said, he's a megalomaniac. He thinks he is God and king and everything. And so he wants to be the one who wins the war. He wants to be the one who's the bondsmith with the Stormfather. And I think he wants to be the one who's the sole bearer of the Oathpact and take on the glory that Taln is due.
That's a wonderful connection to all the other things because, of course, like he's going to be practicing his skill, but he's also going to be driven in any circumstance to do the same. So he's not only taking Taln's position, he's taking Dalinar's position, he's taking the Spreng's position.
Anyone who has power, he wants it. Like he's a toddler who's just always like, me, 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 me.
Yeah, I win the game, I win, I win.
Needs to be the center of attention all the time.
Oh, man. We're building ourselves up into more and more hatred of Ishar. As I said, I think this is all Ishar's fault. But I also think that this line from the Stormfather, that Ishar, before being known as the Herald of Luck, was known as the Binder of Gods. That's a name that I thought would stick, but actually fell to the wayside and is far more terrifying because... this, I think, is what Dalinar was able to do with his mini Oathpact, with his agreement with Odium, is he bound a god.
Yeah.
And if a Shar or an unchained bondsmith can do that at their will, not at the god's will,
Right.
not by like tricking the god into a situation or embarrassing them or whatever, but simply saying, I'll write the rules of the contract and you will follow. That's a Hoyd-esque maneuver there.
Yeah.
Be like, all of you take the great powerful shards. I'll be your accountant. I will be pushing the beans around.
That's what I'm saying. I think that bondsmiths are really powerful in a way that we have not really started to comprehend, but Ashar gives us a little bit of a look into just what is entailed in being a bondsmith.
Ishar gives us some of those hints. He's performing the experiment on the Spren to bring their cognitive forms into the physical realm.
Gross.
None of them have lasted long or been what we would consider successful, but I do think that a shard blade, or maybe the advanced Spren fabrials, those are examples of what he is trying to do.
You think he's trying to make them into fabrials?
No, I'm saying that a Spren bonded with a Night Radiant can take some of their cognitive self and move it into the physical world in the form of a blade or a shield. And Ishar is trying to do that at his will. So he's trying to bring the Spren.
He's trying to bring their full body as they appear in Shadesmar into the physical realm and make them a physical being rather than a kind of
cognitive
ephemeral Spren being that we see.
It's really terrifying.
It's
and
gross.
I also think that it's possible. That's what I'm saying. I think that the Shard Blade's given us an example of how a small version of that, a controlled version of that, is possible because they become a physical thing in the physical realm.
But I think that's the point. In order to become physical, they can only manifest in the way that they do, which
Because
is
they
as
are
a god
bonded.
metal.
They are bonded and they have agreements made. I think Ashar is trying to, again, get around all of those rules.
But I think if he was trying to bring them into the physical realm as a plate...
No, I'm not saying he wants to bring them into the plate.
He doesn't. I'm just saying I think he could do that. He cannot bring their bodies into the physical realm.
I understand. Okay. Yeah, that distinction is important.
Yeah. After his interaction with Dalinar, he retreats to Shinovar. He tells Dalinar, hey, come help me not be crazy anymore, and then I will help you with your Oathpact issue and will deal with Odium, which is, of course, what is going to kick off the events of Stormlight Archive 5 with our Kaladin and our Szeth making their way over to Shinovar.
Yeah, just a buddy cop duo that we were all waiting for. Let's be honest. We thought it was going to be Lift and Szeth working their
I would
way
have loved it.
through a buddy cop, Wayne and Wax adventure-esque thing. But no, it's a curveball from Brandon. He subverted our expectations of the buddy cop duo. Now it's Kaladin and Szeth, enemies to lovers, lovers to friends.
It's going to be great.
It's all crisscrossed in Stormlight 5.
Okay, that was a lot of information, but I think this was really helpful to lay out all of these details of the deep history and these small connections that are sprinkled throughout the first 4 books that, when put together, are really illuminating and important to the overall story that we're going to be seeing over the 10 books of the Stormlight Archive.
Exactly. Hope this lasts a long time as a great reference anytime you need a reminder about the Heralds, who they are, where they've been, and giving us a timeline to work from over the next few months as we are, of course, so excited for the release later this year of Wind and Truth.
Next episode, we're going to be talking about the Unmade, as well as Renarin's status as a corrupted Night Radiant. And until next time, life before death,
Strength before weakness.
journey before destination.